Hello everyone. Today I will introduce to you the fascinating and thrilling story of a German Shepherd. Listen until the end for the surprising ending of the story. Let's start the story. Fear. Scene 1. The Fall. When the world stops, the air was warm, the bridge alive with chatter and sunlight. A perfect May afternoon. Rebecca smiled as Atlas trotted beside her, his oversized puppy paws slapping clumsily against the concrete. 3 months old and barely into the world, he carried himself with the oblivious joy of those who believe life is only made of walkways and tail wags. She stopped to admire the water far below, her fingers tightening slightly on the leash as the wind brushed their faces. Then everything broke. A cyclist swerved sharply, too fast, too close. Atlas startled. In one jerking motion, he slipped his collar and backed into the railing. Time stuttered. Rebecca's hand reached, too late. Her fingers grazed fur but couldn't hold. And then he was gone. Over the edge, his front paws scrabbled. Wildly at the ledge, claws screeching against concrete. His eyes, wide, uncomprehending, locked with hers for a fraction of a heartbeat. Then nothing. Just wind, just space, just a body falling. A scream tore from Rebecca's throat. Ripped, raw by helplessness. Below, the river frothed with spring runoff, a chaos of current and rock waiting to consume anything foolish enough to fall. And her puppy, her Atlas, had fallen. Not just from a bridge, but from the delicate illusion that love and vigilance were enough to keep him safe. And in that instant, the world stopped. Scene 2. The Impossible Rescue. A human enters. The myth Michael Chen didn't hear the scream. He saw it. A flash of fur above the river, a silhouette plummeting like a mistake torn from the sky. He had been strapping gear onto his kayak, prepping for a solo run downstream. But the moment that tiny body hit the water, or rather, disappeared, into it, he moved without hesitation. No time for questions, no time for fear. He launched into the current, paddle slicing deep, eyes scanning the chaos of the Colorado. Somewhere upstream, a woman's voice cracked into sobs. But Michael kept his eyes on the water, searching, hoping against every logical cell in his body. And then, against all reason, hope surfaced. A drenched, trembling puppy head broke the surface 30 yards from the impact point. Atlas was alive, barely. His strokes were erratic, panicked, his tiny frame no match for the pull of the river. The current was merciless, dragging him toward a tangle of branches, a deadly strainer waiting like a trap. Michael paddled hard, adrenaline masking the weight of impossibility. Just as the puppy neared the strainer, the impossible happened again. A branch, untethered and directionless just moments before, shifted in the current, sliding neatly between Atlas and the trap. The puppy slammed into it instead, jolted but safe. The strainer narrowly missed. Michael didn't question it. He guided his kayak closer, extending his paddle. "Grab on, buddy," he muttered, as if the words might reach through fear. Somehow, Atlas did. Tiny paws found the blade. Michael leaned, lifted, and the puppy spilled into his lap, soaked and shivering. But the river wasn't finished with them yet. A hydraulic wave rose in their path. Michael braced, and then, just for a second, the puppy went still, pressing against him, as if surrendering to the rhythm of trust. Together, they broke through. Scene 3. The Stillness After the Storm. Touching the edge of death by the time Michael's kayak scraped against the gravel shore, Rebecca was already in the river, her jeans soaked, hands trembling. She didn't wait for permission. The moment the bow drifted close enough, she reached out and gathered the sodden bundle into her arms. Atlas didn't bark, didn't whimper. His body was limp with exhaustion, his breathing shallow but steady. His head lolled against her shoulder, as if it belonged there. "He's alive," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice cracked, not from volume but from something quieter. grief turning into disbelief. Michael sat back, breathless, his soaked jacket clinging to his chest. "He fought like hell," he murmured, wiping water from his eyes. "That little guy didn't give up." Rebecca dropped to her knees on the muddy shore, cradling the puppy closer. Atlas gave one weak wag of his tail, barely more than a twitch, but it was enough. Enough to crack open the wall of despair that had been rising inside her since the moment he disappeared from the bridge. Around them, emergency crews began arriving, their voices low, respectful. But none dared interrupt the reunion. There was something sacred in the quiet, something that didn't belong to noise. Dr. James Wilson, Rebecca's longtime colleague, crouched beside her, stethoscope already out. "He should be broken," he said softly, running careful hands over the tiny frame. "From that height, this doesn't make sense." Rebecca didn't answer. She was still holding Atlas like something made of light and glass, something too delicate to name. Her medical training told her this was shock. But her heart whispered otherwise, as if the river hadn't drowned him, but given him back, and Michael, the stranger who had shielded the puppy through the wave, now sat quietly nearby, his role already fading. Not the hero of this story, but its bridge. Scene 4. The medical paradox. Breaking the laws of nature. Atlas lay swaddled in emergency blankets on the bank of the river, his small frame trembling more from shock than cold. Rebecca's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, eyes, breath, all the while struggling to steady her own. Her training whispered protocols. Her heart whispered awe. Dr. James Wilson arrived moments later, still wearing his car. Keys clipped to his belt, summoned by urgency and disbelief. He dropped to his knees beside her. "You found him?" "He found us," Rebecca murmured, brushing a thumb over Atlas's damp brow. Wilson took over the assessment, voice low, clinical. "No broken limbs, spines intact, no abdominal swelling. Lungs are clear." He paused, frowning. "This doesn't add up." Rebecca nodded once. "Not even a sprain. The river had churned with rocks. The fall alone should have shattered his bones. But Atlas lay there, breathing evenly now, his body intact. Just a few surface scratches, some bruises, and exhaustion so deep it looked ancient. He fell 100 feet, Wilson said, as if repeating the fact might force reality back into place. Rebecca wrapped the blankets tighter. And the water wasn't calm. There were submerged branches. "Rocks, hydraulics," Wilson's voice dropped. It should have killed him, but it hadn't. There was no rational explanation, and that was the point. The story had shifted. This wasn't survival despite the fall. Something deeper had happened. The fall didn't crush Atlas. It transformed him. A moment passed in silence between them as the puppy stirred, one ear twitching toward a sound no one else seemed to hear. His body was frail, but his awareness, unmistakably alert, as though something ancient had moved into the space between heartbeats. Rebecca met Wilson's gaze. This wasn't just luck. Wilson didn't argue. He simply nodded. Scene 5. Strange whispers, a puppy that sees the invisible. The days that followed Atlas's fall unfolded in quiet, delicate threads. He rested, ate, slept, just as any puppy might. But beneath the surface of routine, something subtle was shifting. Rebecca, ever the scientist, didn't say it aloud at first. She simply observed. Atlas would rise from his blanket and trot to the front door 5 seconds before the bell rang. He would sit beside his water bowl, not when it was empty, but moments before she noticed the level dipping. One morning, he brought her phone from the kitchen counter just seconds before a call came in, from a number she hadn't saved. At first, Rebecca chalked it up to coincidence. Puppies are sensitive, she told herself. Smells, patterns, subconscious cues, but it kept happening. And there was something about the way he did it. Not frantic or performative, but calm. Like he wasn't guessing, but remembering something she hadn't yet experienced. In the clinic, Atlas would occasionally pause in the hallway, ears twitching at a sound no one else heard. Or he would place himself beside a patient's cage long before the diagnostics caught anything wrong. He wasn't agitated. He was aware. Rebecca began keeping notes, timestamps, behaviors, circumstances. But data could only do so much. The truth lived in the air, between her and him. In the way, his amber eyes seemed to follow invisible threads in the room. He was reading the world differently now, as if the fall had cracked open a window inside him, and something vast had stepped quietly through. These weren't tricks. They were whispers. And Atlas, the puppy who had fallen from the sky and survived, had begun to listen to things no one else could hear. Scene 6. The kittens. A testament to purpose. It was supposed to be just a quiet return. 2 weeks after the fall, Rebecca took Atlas back to the riverside. Not to the bridge, not yet, but to the trail below, where the river curled slow and wide. A chance to walk, to breathe, to feel small in the best way. But Atlas didn't want to stroll. He froze, then bolted. Rebecca barely had time to shout before the leash slipped from her hand. Atlas tore through the underbrush with startling precision, not like a dog chasing a squirrel, but like a compass, like something pulling him forward with a clarity even she couldn't deny. By the time she caught up, he was pawing frantically at a knot of reeds on the muddy bank, whining, digging, urgent. At first, she thought he'd found an injured animal, but then she heard it. Faint, barely more than breath, a mew. Heart lurching, Rebecca knelt and pulled. Aside the reeds. There, half submerged in a torn plastic bag, were 3 newborn kittens. Soaked, silent, skeletal with cold. Abandoned. Left to die. Her hands shook as she wrapped them in her jacket. "How did you know?" she whispered. Atlas didn't answer. He just stood beside her, watching. Not proud, not seeking praise, just certain. Like this was what he'd come here to do. Later, as the kittens lay in an incubator, fragile but stable, Rebecca sat beside Atlas on the clinic floor. She looked at the puppy who should not have survived, who now found life where others saw nothing. His fall hadn't been a freak accident. It had been a turning point. Atlas hadn't been saved for himself. He had been saved to save. And the world, chaotic, cruel, breathtakingly fragile, had just begun to feel his presence. Scene 7. A mind beyond the body. The awakening. Expands it began with a cat named Shadow. A routine checkup, nothing alarming. The elderly tabby stretched lazily, on the exam table purring. But Atlas stood rigid beside Rebecca, his tail stiff, ears pointed, paw tapping insistently at the floor. He whined, low, unsettled. Rebecca paused mid-examination. "Atlas?" she asked, confused. Then she looked at the cat again. The rhythm of its breathing. The subtle tension in its belly. She ordered a scan, almost on instinct. What they found stunned her. An early-stage abdominal blockage. No visible signs, no symptoms. But left untreated, it would have turned fatal in days. Atlas had known. From that moment, the pattern crystallized. A woman with a hidden heart murmur. Atlas refused to leave her side in the waiting room. A child. Visiting the clinic with her father, Atlas pressed his nose to the girl's leg, alerting Rebecca to an infection her family hadn't noticed. He wasn't just sensing pain. He was reading something deeper, quiet distress echoing in dimensions humans couldn't measure. Rebecca began keeping records, patterns, variables. But her data only proved what her gut already knew. This wasn't coincidence. It was cognition. Enter Dr. Eleanor Reeves, animal cognition researcher, cautious skeptic, and eventually, the first to say aloud what Rebecca dared only feel. The fall changed more than his body. She ran tests, measured reflexes, stimuli, neural activity. Atlas didn't just respond faster, he responded earlier. As if time folded differently for him, and yet he remained calm, grounded, uninterested in attention. He wasn't performing, he was perceiving. One quiet afternoon, as Dr. Reeves reviewed his scans, she whispered more to herself than anyone else. What if trauma didn't shut him down, but opened a door the rest of us can't see? Atlas blinked, as if he already knew. Scene 8. The waters remember. The return to the bridge. A year to the day. Rebecca hadn't planned to go. Not really. But that morning, Atlas stood at the door, tail still, eyes fixed west, toward the river. Toward the bridge. She followed. Dr. Reeves joined them, notebook in hand, cautious but intrigued. Atlas had changed in ways no chart could fully hold. He moved now with a strange certainty, not like a dog learning the world, but like one remembering. The bridge hadn't changed much. The rail had been repaired, reinforced. Tourists came and went, unaware of what had once passed through this place like myth through mist. Atlas led them to the exact spot. No fear, no flinch. He simply sat, poised, alert, timeless. Rebecca knelt beside him. "Is this where it started?" she whispered. Atlas turned to her, amber eyes luminous. Then, gently, he lifted his paw and placed it over her heart. The touch was light, but the world cracked open. In a single instant, Rebecca felt what he felt, the flow of currents beneath them, the tremor of leaves in far-off trees, the electrical dance of life moving through soil. She saw connections, not visual, but undeniable. The world was alive, breathing, singing in frequencies beyond language. She gasped, staggering back. Dr. Reeves reached out, and Atlas touched her hand. The same surge, the same awe. This isn't just sensory, Reeves whispered. He's sharing perception. A bridge. Atlas stepped back as if to say, "Now you see," and they did. The fall hadn't made him more. It had revealed what was already there. A consciousness that could reach, touch, connect, not just to save, but to awaken, and the river below, churning, endless, ancient, remembered too. Scene 9. Hero among us. The world begins to listen, they called him lucky at first, then gifted, then miraculous. But titles began to fail, because Atlas didn't act like a hero. He didn't pose, he didn't hesitate. He just knew. At Lake Carson, when a teenage girl slipped beneath the surface mid-laugh, no one saw her vanish. No one except Atlas. He had been playing fetch on the shoreline, tongue out, tail wagging, until he stopped, rigid, silent, then sprinting. Rebecca called after him, panicked. But Atlas dove into the water, swimming in a straight line toward something no one else had noticed. A lifeguard followed, but arrived too late to lead. Atlas was already there, holding the girl by her shirt, keeping her face above the water until help arrived. Later, the girl's mother sobbed. How did he know? 2 weeks later, Atlas pulled Rebecca down a mountain road with startling urgency. At a trailhead, they found an abandoned vehicle, and 2 miles into dense forest, a diabetic hiker, disoriented, collapsed, hours from being found by any conventional search party. "He saved my life," the man said, voice raw from dehydration. No one else even knew where I was. Then came Lisa, a wildlife photographer who had fallen from a ridge. Her phone smashed, her leg broken. No distress call, no locator. But Atlas felt her. Even more haunting? Lisa confessed that in her moments of lucid pain, she had visualized a German shepherd finding her. "I don't even know why," she whispered. "I've never owned a dog, but I saw him before I saw him." Over and over, the words echoed from the rescued. How did he know? And in that whispered question, the narrative quietly shifted. Atlas wasn't finding the lost. He was returning to them, as if, somehow, they had already called his name. Scene 10. Legacy of Light, the Conscious Bridge. It was dusk, on the anniversary of the fall. The riverside bridge, once a symbol of fear, now stood whole, its railing reinforced, its path often walked by children, couples, quiet travelers. But on this evening, it belonged to Atlas. No cameras, no crowds, just Rebecca, Dr. Reeves, and the German shepherd whose very presence had redrawn the edges of possibility. Atlas moved slowly to the center, where steel met sky. Where he had once vanished. But now he stood tall. Rebecca followed. No leash, no words. She didn't need them. Atlas turned, meeting her gaze, then stepped forward and pressed his paw gently against her chest. This time, she was ready. And again, the veil lifted. She felt the warmth of the sun through clouds not yet formed, heard the vibration of ants below the bridge, tasted the tension of someone crying 3 blocks away. It was not chaos, it was clarity, connection. Dr. Reeves, her voice trembling, whispered, "This is not just perception, it's communion." Atlas stepped back. He didn't glow, he didn't howl. He simply was. A being who had fallen, not to be broken, but to break open the wall between instinct and understanding. He had returned not to the site of trauma, but to the threshold of becoming. That night, as the stars rose over the river, Rebecca understood. Atlas's gift was never about what he could do. It was about what he reminded us to feel. The bridge was no longer a place of loss. It was a story, forever changed by a single fall, and the dog who rose from it, carrying light where no one had dared to look. And so he walked on. Not a miracle, a message.